Abandoned. Abandoned buildings. Abandoned factories. Abandoned property. Abide by. Abide by a rule. Abide by a law. Abide by an agreement. Adhere. Adhere to beliefs. Adhere to ideals. Adhere to principle. Undermine. Undermine a notion. Undermine a theory. Undermine an argument. Uniform. Uniform distribution. Uniform size. Uniform proportion. Vivid. A vivid description. A vivid portrait. A vivid imagery. Volatile. A volatile market. A volatile economy. A volatile situation. Vocational. Vocational training. Vocational education. Vocational course. Withstand. Withstand an attack. Withstand a challenge. Withstand an earthquake. Dogma. Ideological dogma. Religious dogma. Outdated dogma. Empirical. An empirical finding. From empirical evidence. From empirical analysis. Endorsement. Endorsement of a product. Endorsement of a brand. Endorsement of a movie. Eradication. Eradication of disease. Eradication of poverty. Eradication of illiteracy. Exacerbate. Exacerbate a problem. Exacerbate a situation. Exacerbate a crisis. Exemption. Exemption from a law. Exemption from a tax. Grant an exemption. Abnormal. Abnormal bleeding. Abnormal behavior. Abnormal heartbeat. Abdominal. Abdominal infection. Abdominal injuries. Abdominal organs. Abundant. Abundant resources. Abundant supply. Abundant evidence. Abortion. Abortion policy. Abortion protesters. Abortion rights. Accelerate. Accelerate growth. Accelerate a process. Accelerate a system. Abuse. Abuse of alcohol. Abuse of drugs. Abuse of power. Accumulate. Accumulate wealth. Accumulate wisdom. Accumulate knowledge. Access. Emergency access. Internet access. Limited access. Acknowledge. Acknowledge the existence. Acknowledge the need. Acknowledge the risk. Activists. Animal rights activist. Anti-slavery activist. Anti-tobacco activist. Activate. Activate a process. Activate an alarm. Activate a gene. Administration. Business administration. School administration. Space administration. Acute. Acute pain. Acute symptoms. Acute infection. Adventure. Adventure sports. Adventure travel. Outdoor adventure. Addiction. Drug addiction. Chronic addiction. Long-term addiction. Adverse. Adverse effects. Adverse reaction. Adverse outcome. Addictive. Highly addictive. Potentially addictive. Physically addictive. Advisory. Advisory committee. Advisory panel. Advisory board. Adjacent. Adjacent building. Adjacent neighborhood. Adjacent land. Aerial. Aerial attack. Aerial delivery. Aerial detection. Adolescence. During adolescence. Before adolescence. Reach adolescence. Agency. Space agency. Spy agency. Advertising agency. Anxiety. Anxiety attack. Anxiety disorder. Chronic anxiety. Advocate. Advocate a reform. Advocate a legislation. Advocate an amendment. Archaeological. Archaeological evidence. Archaeological finds. Archaeological treasure. Aesthetic. Aesthetic beauty. Aesthetic appeal. Aesthetic judgment. Artificial. Artificial intelligence. Artificial sweetener. Artificial additives. Aggravate. Aggravate a situation. Aggravate an injury. Aggravating factors. Pinpoint. Pinpoint the location. Pinpoint the cause. Pinpoint the problem. Pragmatic. A pragmatic approach. A pragmatic attitude. A pragmatic view. Predominant. A predominant symptom. A predominant influence. A predominant role. Pressing. A pressing issue. A pressing concern. A pressing question. Profound. A profound impact. A profound influence. A profound implication. Propaganda. Spread propaganda. Believe propaganda. Prevent propaganda. Recession. A global recession. A severe recession. An economic recession. Resolve. Resolve a dispute. Resolve a conflict. Resolve an issue. Rhetorical. A rhetorical question. A rhetorical situation. A rhetorical device. Genre. A musical genre. A literary genre. A popular genre. Groundbreaking. Groundbreaking research. Groundbreaking discovery. Groundbreaking study. Heritage. A cultural heritage. An ancient heritage. A rich heritage. Domestic. Domestic affairs. Domestic dispute. Domestic violence. Hierarchy. A social hierarchy. A bureaucratic hierarchy. A business hierarchy. Hostile. A hostile environment. A hostile climate. A hostile circumstance. Humanitarian. Humanitarian aid. Humanitarian crisis. Humanitarian relief. Aspect. Critical aspect. Difficult aspect. Global aspect. Ally. Ally in a war. Wartime ally. Political ally. Assessment. Student assessment. Classroom assessment. Standardized assessment. Amend. Amend a law. Amend a treaty. Amend a legislation. Barrier. Age barrier. Language barrier. Security barrier. Belief. Widely held belief. Long-standing belief. Traditional belief. Analogy. Make an analogy. Draw an analogy. A false analogy. Anatomical. Anatomical studies. Anatomical structures. Anatomical specimen. Breeding. Breeding ground. Breeding practices. Breeding program. Ancestor. A common ancestor. A distant ancestor. Immediate ancestor. Budget. Budget deficit. Budget surplus. Budget shortfall. Ancestry. Maternal ancestry. Paternal ancestry. Muslim ancestry. Capital. Investment capital. Venture capital. Market capital. Anticipate. Anticipate a decline. Anticipate a slowdown. Anticipate a reaction. Chronic. Chronic anxiety. Chronic illnesses. Chronic headache. Apparatus. Breathing apparatus. Electrical apparatus. Mechanical apparatus. Complication. Long-term complications. Serious complication. Severe complication. Apparent. An apparent failure. An apparent reason. An apparent condition. Concern. Health concern. Safety concerns. Widespread concern. Arbitrary. An arbitrary arrest. An arbitrary execution. An arbitrary deadline. Conflicting. Conflicting reports. Conflicting opinions. Conflicting thoughts. Archive. A digital archive. An online archive. A national archive. Consequence. Global consequences. Deadly consequences. Potential consequence. Arid. An arid region. An arid landscape. An arid desert. Corporate. Corporate culture. Corporate hierarchy. Corporate ladder. Artifact. A cultural artifact. A historical artifact. An ancient artifact. Cross. Crossbreed. Cross-examination. Cross-section. Degree. Degree of certainty. Degree of danger. Degree of certainty. Assign. Assign a task. Assign a duty. Assign homework. Depression. Symptoms of depression. Diagnosis of depression. History of depression. Assistance. Humanitarian assistance. Financial assistance. Technical assistance. Diplomatic. Diplomatic discussion. Diplomatic mission. Diplomatic relations. Assurance. An assurance of safety. Assurance of security. Assurance of loyalty. Discrimination. Age discrimination. Job discrimination. Racial discrimination. Atomic. Atomic energy. Atomic weapons. Atomic bomb. Disease. Disease-prone. Disease-causing. Disease-stricken. Attain. Attain enlightenment. Attain perfection. Attain a goal. Dispute. Internal dispute. Domestic dispute. Territorial dispute. Audit. Audit a company. Audit an account. An audit report. Dwindling. Dwindling supply. Dwindling resources. Dwindling economy. Dysfunction. Family dysfunction. Sexual dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction. Autonomous. An autonomous region. An autonomous province. An autonomous unit. Efficient. Economically efficient. Technically efficient. Operationally efficient. Biodiversity. Animal biodiversity. Marine biodiversity. Global biodiversity. Emerging. Emerging markets. Emerging technology. Emerging trends. Biographical. Biographical books. Biographical details. Biographical notes. Equipment. Essential equipment. Medical equipment. Protective equipment. Breed. A rare breed. An exotic breed. A successful breed. Cultural. Cultural differences. Cultural heritage. Cultural identification. Evidence. Eyewitness evidence. Compelling evidence. Forensic evidence. Carbon dating. Carbon dating tests. Carbon dating methods. Carbon dating events. Expected. Higher than expected. Larger than expected. Longer than expected. Carnivorous. A carnivorous animal. A carnivorous species. A carnivorous plant. Exposure. Radiation exposure. Radioactive exposure. Toxic exposure. Catastrophe. A humanitarian catastrophe. An environmental catastrophe. An economic catastrophe. Factor. Contributing factor. Motivating factor. Mitigating factor. Census. Carry out a census. A population census. A nationwide census. Fastest growing. Fastest growing economy. Fastest growing market. Fastest growing religion. Fellow. Fellow academic. Fellow practitioner. Fellow scientist. Cognitive. Cognitive development. Cognitive skills. Cognitive psychology. Heritage. World's heritage. Cultural heritage. National heritage. Coherent. A coherent strategy. A coherent policy. A coherent approach. Human rights. Human rights abuses. Human rights activists. Human rights violations. Coincidence. A happy coincidence. A strange coincidence. A fortunate coincidence. In-depth. In-depth interview. In-depth investigation. In-depth research. Collaboration. A scientific collaboration. A technical collaboration. A research collaboration. Initiative. Government initiative. Research initiatives. Diplomatic initiative. Colony. A former colony. Establish a colony. Govern a colony. Intelligence. Military intelligence. Foreign intelligence. Tactical intelligence. Combat. Combat terrorism. Combat racism. Combat corruption. Juvenile. Juvenile delinquency. Juvenile detention. Juvenile violence. Commission. Commission a study. Commission a report. Commission a research. Organ. Organ damage. Organ donation. Organ recipient. Commodities. Basic commodities. Tradable commodities. Valuable commodities. Outbreak. Disease outbreak. Measles outbreak. Sporadic outbreaks. Compelling. A compelling argument. A compelling outcome. A compelling evidence. Privacy. Privacy abuses. Privacy concerns. Privacy violation. Racial. Racial discrimination. Racial inequality. Racial prejudice. Religious. Religious gathering. Religious prejudice. Religious background. Comply. Comply with regulations. Comply with laws. Comply with rules. Response. Disaster response. Emergency response. Immediate response. Satellite. Satellite intelligence. Satellite trajectory. Weather satellite. Compulsory. Compulsory vaccination. Compulsory schooling. Compulsory insurance. Space. Space agency. Space exploration. Space mission. Conclusive. Conclusive proof. Conclusive results. Conclusive decision. Standard. Standard pattern. Standard practice. Standard procedure. Concurrent. Concurrent symptoms. Concurrent infections. Concurrent occurrences. Traditional. Traditional belief. Traditional marriage. Traditional practice. Condemn. Strongly condemn. Publicly condemn. Unequivocally condemn. Transmission. Transmission of disease. Mode of transmission. Risk of transmission. Connotation. Negative connotation. Positive connotation. Emotional connotation. Violation. Copyright violation. Workplace violation. Domestic violation. Consecutive. Consecutive days. Consecutive nights. Consecutive months. Conventional. Conventional wisdom. Conventional treatment. Conventional methods. Consensus. A scientific consensus. A broad consensus. A general consensus. Cooperative. A cooperative approach. A cooperative effort. A cooperative research. Constitution. A written constitution. An old constitution. An interim constitution. Efficient. Fuel efficient. Energy efficient. Extremely efficient. Contamination. Bacterial contamination. Chemical contamination. Radioactive contamination. Obesity. The obesity epidemic. The obesity rate. Childhood obesity. Convey. Convey a sense. Convey a meaning. Convey a message. Reinforce. Reinforce a notion. Reinforce a belief. Reinforce a stereotype. Convincing. A convincing argument. A convincing theory. A convincing evidence. Inhabitant. Indigenous inhabitant. Native inhabitants. Original inhabitants. Copyright. Infringe a copyright. Violate a copyright. Breach a copyright. Pioneering. Pioneering work. Pioneering research. Pioneering initiative. Correlation. A strong correlation. A direct correlation. A negative correlation. Evolve. Language evolves. Society evolves. Technology evolves. Counter. Counter-threat. Counter-accusation. Counter-argument. Distinct. A distinct category. A distinct type. A distinct entity. Credibility. Lose credibility. Gain credibility. Maintain credibility. Diverse. Culturally diverse. Geographically diverse. Ethnically diverse. Comparatively. Comparatively small. Comparatively rare. Comparatively cheap. Curriculum. National curriculum. A core curriculum. A broad curriculum. Indefinitely. Indefinitely suspended. Indefinitely postponed. Indefinitely delayed. Crucial. A crucial decision. A crucial point. A crucial factor. Framework. Develop a framework. Set a framework. Regulate a framework. Decay. Moral decay. Physical decay. Social decay. Biased. A biased argument. A biased opinion. A biased decision. Ability. Cognitive ability. Mental ability. Remarkable ability. Deficiency. A nutritional deficiency. A dietary deficiency. A vitamin deficiency. Academic. Academic eligibility. Academic integrity. Academic probation. Dehydration. Prevent dehydration. Cause dehydration. Severe dehydration. Advantage. Competitive advantage. Tactical advantage. Technological advantage. Demographic. A demographic change. A demographic shift. A demographic trend. Definitive. A definitive agreement. A definitive statement. A definitive conclusion. Dense. A dense rainforest. A dense population. A dense network. Advertising. Advertising agency. Advertising campaign. Advertising slogan. Depiction. A graphic depiction. A realistic depiction. A vivid depiction. Depletion. The depletion of ozone layer. The depletion of resources. Soil depletion. Annual. Annual gathering. Annual pilgrimage. Annual budget. Deprived. A deprived area. A deprived community. A deprived upbringing. Deterioration. Rapid deterioration. Significant deterioration. Physical deterioration. Deviation. Deviation from a path. Deviation from a pattern. Deviation from a rule. Attempt. Rescue attempts. Suicide attempt. Repeated attempts. Discretionary. Discretionary authority. Discretionary power. Discretionary grant. Attention. Attention deficit. Attention grabbing. Medical attention. Distortion. Distortion of the truth. Distortion of the history. Distortion of the facts. Diversification. Social diversification. Cultural diversification. Geographic diversification. Biological. Biological parents. Biological weapons. Biological warfare. DNA. DNA fingerprinting. DNA profiling. DNA matching. Ecosystem. A coastal ecosystem. A fragile ecosystem. A balanced ecosystem. Ceremony. Funeral ceremony. Graduation ceremony. Closing ceremony. Entity. A distinct entity. An autonomous entity. An independent entity. Epidemic. A global epidemic. An infectious epidemic. A malaria epidemic. Entrepreneurial. An entrepreneurial culture. An entrepreneurial spirit. An entrepreneurial venture. Classroom. Classroom assessment. Classroom behavior. Classroom discussion. Ethical. An ethical dilemma. An ethical obligation. An ethical principle. Evoke. Evoke memories. Evoke emotions. Evoke feelings. Competition. Beauty competition. Professional competition. National competition. Excavate. Excavate a site. Excavate a grave. Excavate a skeleton. Facilitate. Facilitate cooperation. Facilitate integration. Facilitate access. Fauna. Marine fauna. Native fauna. Local fauna. Flora. Tropical flora. Aquatic flora. Bacterial flora. Feminine. A feminine trait. A feminine attribute. A feminine role. Consumer. Consumer behavior. Consumer privacy. Consumer protection. Fieldwork. Archaeological fieldwork. Scientific fieldwork. Extensive fieldwork. Flawed. A flawed premise. A flawed assumption. A flawed reasoning. Formulate. Formulate a policy. Formulate a hypothesis. Formulate a theory. Franchise. A franchise holder. A franchise outlet. A franchise chain. Culture. Traditional culture. Mainstream culture. Corporate culture. Fraud. Perpetrate a fraud. Orchestrate a fraud. Commit a fraud. Fraudulent. A fraudulent scheme. A fraudulent claim. A fraudulent email. Genetic. Genetic engineering. Genetic modification. Genetic mutation. Cyber. Cyber attack. Cybersecurity. Cyber threats. Effect. Health effects. Lingering effects. Profound effect. Ideology. A political ideology. A religious ideology. A secular ideology. Imminent. An imminent threat. An imminent danger. An imminent attack. Incentive. A financial incentive. A cash incentive. An extra incentive. Incorporate. Incorporate a feature. Incorporate a system. Incorporate a technology. Friendly. Climate friendly. Environment friendly. User friendly. Indigenous. Indigenous community. Indigenous people. Indigenous language. Inference. A logical inference. Draw an inference. Make an inference. Inherent. An inherent risk. An inherent danger. An inherent characteristic. Fundamental. Fundamental issue. Fundamental question. Fundamental rights. Integrity. Artistic integrity. Intellectual integrity. Academic integrity. Intense. Intense pressure. Intense competition. Intense speculation. Interference. Government interference. State interference. Foreign interference. Heavy. Heavy casualties. Heavy equipment. Heavy lifting. Intrinsic. Intrinsic value. Intrinsic worth. Intrinsic importance. Irreparable. Irreparable damage. Irreparable injury. Irreparable loss. Landmark. A historic landmark. An architectural landmark. A local landmark. Legitimate. A legitimate heir. A legitimate ruler. A legitimate marriage. Immediate. Immediate access. Immediate evacuation. Immediate response. Marine. A marine environment. A marine ecosystem. A marine biology. Maternal. A maternal instinct. A maternal affection. A maternal devotion. Medieval. A medieval castle. A medieval fortress. A medieval knight. Metaphorical. Metaphorical language. Metaphorical meaning. Metaphorical approach. Legal. Legal advisor. Legal aspects. Legal obligation. Migration. Annual migration. Seasonal migration. Winter migration. Momentum. Gain a momentum. Keep momentum. Lose momentum. Multicultural. Multicultural society. Multicultural approach. Multicultural influence. Niche. A market niche. A profitable niche. A product niche. Long-term. Long-term care. Long-term exposure. Long-term hazards. Orbit. Orbit the planet. Orbit the moon. Orbit the sun. Paradigm. A new paradigm. An economic paradigm. A scientific paradigm. Parasitic. A parasitic infection. A parasitic disease. A parasitic illness. Measure. Relief measures. Safety measure. Protective measures. Particle. A subatomic particle. A radioactive particle. A charged particle. Paternal. Paternal affection. Paternal instinct. Paternal devotion. Penultimate. The penultimate stage. The penultimate chapter. The penultimate paragraph. Press. Press briefing. Press conference. Press reports. Pervasive. Pervasive influence. Pervasive corruption. Pervasive disorder. Reaction. Chain reaction. Adverse reaction. Nuclear reaction. Pivotal. A pivotal role. A pivotal moment. A pivotal point. Plagiarize. Plagiarize a story. Plagiarize a passage. Plagiarize an essay. Pollination. Pollination of flowers. Pollination by bees. Pollination by insects. Safety. Safety awareness. Safety concerns. Safety features. Portrait. A vivid portrait. A full-length portrait. A portrait photographer. Practitioner. A general practitioner. A qualified practitioner. A medial practitioner. Sexual. Sexual abuse. Sexual harassment. Sexual misconduct. Precaution. Safety precautions. Security precautions. Extra precautions. Predator. A natural predator. A marine predator. A feral predator. Supply. Emergency supply. Relief supplies. Dwindling supply. Predominantly. Predominantly Muslim. Predominantly white. Predominantly black. Privileged. A privileged background. A privileged upbringing. A privileged class. Symptoms. Flu symptoms. Withdrawal symptoms. Allergic symptoms. Prolong. Prolong suffering. Prolong agony. Prolong conflict. Prominent. A prominent role. A prominent figure. A prominent feature. Protocol. A wireless protocol. An encryption protocol. A network protocol. Prone. Prone to damage. Prone to attack. Prone to accident. Accuracy. Absolute accuracy. Historical accuracy. Total accuracy. Technology. Encryption technology. Stealth technology. Emerging technology. Provoke. Provoke a reaction. Provoke a response. Provoke an outcry. Proximity. Close proximity. Geographical proximity. Physical proximity. Qualitative. Qualitative research. Qualitative study. Qualitative analysis. Redundancy. Compulsory redundancies. Voluntary redundancy. A redundancy package. Waste. Waste disposal. Waste incineration. Waste management. Relaxation. Relaxation of a restriction. Relaxation of a regulation. Relaxation of a law. Repercussion. Serious repercussions. Negative repercussions. Damaging repercussions. Restructure. Restructure a company. Restructure an industry. Restructure an economy. Testimony. A written testimony. A false testimony. A court testimony. Transitional. A transitional period. A transitional phase. A transitional government. Picturesque. Picturesque scenery. Picturesque location. Picturesque landscape. Treaty. A peace treaty. A climate treaty. A formal treaty. Unanimous. A unanimous agreement. A unanimous vote. A unanimous support. Amendment. Proposed amendment. Major amendment. Minor amendment. Unethical. Unethical practices. Unethical activity. Unethical behavior. Unification. A happy unification. A peaceful unification. A national unification. Unpredictable. Unpredictable result. Unpredictable situation. Unpredictable weather. Unrest. Civil unrest. Social unrest. Widespread unrest. Verbal. A verbal abuse. A verbal attack. A verbal assurance. Veto. A veto of legislation. A veto of a bill. A veto of a reform. Viability. Financial viability. Economic viability. Commercial viability. Violation. A human rights violation. A copyright violation. A parole violation. White collar. A white collar worker. A white collar employee. A white collar union. Yield. Yield results. Yield information. Yield clues.